Right, ladies and gentlemen, friends, members, and those who are neither, anyone who's been here for the nth time or who's come for the first time, welcome to the Royal Society of Chemistry's April lecture. This evening we have, as our guest speaker, Richard, who's going to talk to us about artificial intelligence.
Richard Adams.
Richard
the
Adams.
guy who wrote Watership Down, same name.
That's right. Well, I mean, I unfortunately, my name's not Michael. And if I could have, then I could claim to be the Andromeda Strain and Jurassic Park.
Not only that,
he was also
the old classic comedies.
Yes. Dealing comedies. That's true.
That was Charles Crichton, wasn't it? Well, are you the admirable Crichton?
They're always admirable Crichtons. The Crichtons have always been admirable.
That was Kenneth Moore.
Yes, right. Anyway, we are very pleased to have you with us. We very nearly didn't have you with us, but that's another story and we shan't go into it.
It's a delayed train.
We met on Eurostar coming out of London to Brussels a number of weeks ago, and we started talking about various things and ended up suggesting that perhaps Richard would like to come and talk to us about artificial intelligence. Now, he has a particular angle on this subject because he's not just a specialist in technology and in artificial intelligence, which is what he's doing in his job where he's been for the last 2 years with London and North Eastern Railways, LNER, as you might know, the only profit-making company in the British railway system.
State-owned.
And he actually has a considerable experience in both art and in music. So I think we're going to get a talk on artificial intelligence, which will introduce us to what artificial intelligence is, but will also give us a more clear indication of what its implications are for some of the other aspects.
Well, I think what you're going to see is all the stuff I argue about when I'm in the pub. So, you know, I don't drink anymore, but I still act drunk. And you have these discussions in the pubs, and this is a very personal, philosophical sort of take on it. But if you want to ask me anything technical or anything related to chemistry, which I know nothing about, I can talk about the tech. And please feel free to interrupt.
So that's that. I don't need to make any more introduction. With that, you have the floor, sir. Take it away.
But I do mean that. If you want to, just wave your hand and I'll stop and talk. It doesn't frighten me. My very first job was teaching 15-year-olds. I can just about handle you lot. It's interesting that you've got to think laterally. One of the things we were just talking about there is I've had a 30-odd year career really in technology, emerging technology. Not even standard technology. I'm usually at the front somewhere doing new things, and that I couldn't have done without the fine art degree, because the fine art degree and the way I was taught at that particular independent school was all about conceptual art. And what that did was it gave us intellectual structures to be able to tackle questions. So it was more a philosophy thing, if you thinking back on it. And philosophy itself is becoming very, very important in AI. Because once you get to the stage where machines can do anything, and they can do it themselves, and they can initiate it, the underpinning philosophy of how we build those machines is really important. And so to be able to sort of apply philosophy of any kind to a technological situation with this new revolutionary stuff, and it really is revolutionary. It's every bit as revolutionary as I think the press make it out to be. For once they've got something right in between the articles about Meghan Markle. Or is that just a British thing? Probably a British thing, sorry. Oh, she was in there again today. It's like, oh, Jesus Christ, leave her alone. I think it's really important, and I think I can't divorce my philosophical approach from technology from what I'm doing, and it's also in the art I make, and it's been sort of infused in everything. And I think one of the things that kicked off around 1990, because obviously I'm a lot older than I look, I started to make art with technology, and it was very basic technology, very basic. But actually it was fascinating, and I found the only master's degree course in Europe at the time that took artists and taught you how to use technology. And this was just about when the web browsers appeared. So we didn't have the web. We had to learn science, physics, maths. So if I wanted to make a ball bounce, I had to learn specularity of surfaces, I had to learn geodesic structures, I had to learn all the maths of that to be able to make a ball bounce. Now you just pick it off that thing, put it on, draw a gravity line, and off you go. And in fact now you increasingly just ask a machine to do it for you. But what it means is I've got an underlying sense of what's going off that I think a lot of other creatives who work with tech that came later don't really have. And my advice with AI at the start of the talk and at the end of the talk is, if you're going to work with it, try and understand it. Because if you don't, all you'll do is get outputs based on other people's outputs. There's less novelty, because all it does is find all the data you're using and it gives you what it thinks you want on a probabilistic level, right? So it's all about probabilities. It's all it is at the moment is advanced statistics. There's more emerging, but it is pretty much that. So when you work with machine learning, it is just weather forecasting. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But obviously then what the talk will be, I can't separate myself from this, and this is a chance to just talk about anything you're interested in as long as AI. I rarely get those opportunities. I was in Manchester and I was talking about smart railways on Monday. But it all ties together. And so my current job, I am head of architecture. A head of in the British rail industry is about the same level as a civil service deputy director or a professor in a university. We're the people who are the experts, heads of teams who make things happen and set the direction for whatever your specialism is. So I've got a lot of responsibility, and my responsibility in particular is the digital architecture. So that's the entire set of systems that are sitting below what people see, that connect everything, make everything work. So every day I'm increasingly dealing with things like complexity. If I push that, what happens here? Through this amazing sort of jumble of stuff. And what we've increasingly started to do in that company is, as part of our transformation, is to employ machine learning. And we're employing AI and robotic process automation. And so, it's a fast learning job. It's why I took the job. Somebody said to me, "Why the hell are you working in railways? You worked on Xbox One." You don't get as much input in Microsoft. You really don't. That's your bit and you stay there. Mine is wide-ranging across the company, and I've got a great open brief. Just make the technology work and transform us into a technological shape that's fit for the future. And it's a brilliant time because all these techniques that we're going to talk about are coming out, but I still think of myself as an artist. In fact, I've put a small selection of places I've worked here, and it's worth noting simply because of the breadth of it. But at the moment I've worked at LNER. I've also worked at what's called Great British Railways last year, which is a central body trying to pull the railways together. But I've also worked on Xbox One. I managed digital transformation at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Worked at Aviva, Proximus, BBC, Sky, all these other things, all on emerging technology in some form or another, whether it's games or whether it's media. I mean, back in 1993 I was making interactive television. It didn't work. It's only just about working now, and that's because of Twitter. But I've also taught in universities and done things in universities. So I co-founded the School of Communication Arts, which is in London, which is a radical model for training people in creativity. It's been open about 10 or 11 years. It's the most awarded student creativity college in the country. We started with no teachers, and we started with a wikified curriculum that grew and flowed and built over complexity. Again, this is that type of thinking. How do you radically re-engineer something? And we, within a year, got to the point where we could teach students how to survive as a senior creative in agencies, but we could do it in 9 months, not 3 years. That's gone on to great things. I don't have much to do with it anymore. I ran out of money. University of West London, I founded the Digital Arts Department in the London College of Music there years and years ago. Created 2 digital arts degrees and 2 masters, including an M.Mus in composing for games. University of Lincoln Senior Fellow, visiting professor at Salford, and I've also, first job was a school teacher. So in answer to what we talk about careers, you can do anything, just do it, that's my attitude. It does give me a unique view of things, because I've seen things being done in different ways in different places in a way somebody who worked somewhere for 20 years might not. I'm not saying it's better or worse, it's just different. And similarly with our approach to this technology, of course, you know, it doesn't. Now forgive me, I don't look like that anymore, but this is from 4 or 5 years ago. This is the art I do. This is actually computer art. So this was trauma therapy. That's called madness. They're anti-selfies. Every time I felt traumatised, started a piece of work, got rid of it. And it worked. Why are they computerised? I was sat in a hospital bed, I did sketches or I took photos, I wrote some code, I manipulated them, and then I painted in with digital paint, and then I thought, well, these look like paintings, so I went the whole Northern European Expressionism hog, because it's a very good language for angst, and put them on canvas and put them in a gallery and rounded off the whole project really with this sort of exhibition, to which I invited my heart surgeon, who was very nervous. That's the stuff I've been doing. I do a lot more photography these days, just as a visual art thing, and music. I make music, I'm on Spotify and stuff, but don't listen to it, it's not easy listening. It's not even music, thinking about it. So let's talk about AI. It's a minefield. We have no idea. Anybody could stand here and make predictions. Some might come true, some might not. But it is a minefield in certain ways. We have to think about this. It's a minefield in terms of intellectual property. If you go on ChatGPT and use it, as we all know, it's scraped the internet. And most of the answers you're getting is sourced from stuff that it shouldn't be looking at, property-wise. So when people go and make art in an AI art generator, I'll come on to this because I think this is one of the big problems with it. It has an awful lot of problems in that it's all sourced from other people's work, and artists are not happy. I would imagine scientists aren't either, because they'll not get citations for it. So if it's using their work, there's no citation coming out of this. And the other problem with it is it's feeding back on itself. It's already scraped the internet, and it's now scraping what's left of the scrapings, what's been re-scraped and republished. And it's starting to become a little bit inbred, which is an interesting thing. But IP is a minefield. I think the data sources thing is what I'm just alluding to there with the inbred comment, in that the data sources are now not as pure as they were just even 2 years ago. It's data being used to do things, and then that being used again and again, and it's wearing the data down, and it's averaging things out, which is a problem I'll come on to. Privacy is a nightmare. First thing you've got to do at work is don't use ChatGPT. If you put any of your business plan in there, it's in there, and you might get a great PowerPoint deck from it, but you're giving away business secrets because it's in there. And if there's anything similar to what you're asking for, in my case a rail, anything to do with rail, another rail company uses it, they might find what we've put in there in a slightly different form. But there are a lot of secrets actually being given away through people using this. Does anybody put their business plan up there? Yeah?
How is the business plan on? But I was with an Indian company in America, and when this chap stuff was new, he said, let's see what we could write about our company's capability in cloud unit cloud. And so within about 40 seconds, we had 2 pages. He started to read it, and I recognised that
Yeah, this is it. I think this is the point, and this is the problem. So all of this stuff becomes really problematic. We haven't worked out how to deal with it. Privacy, and obviously then security. Also, we worried a lot about jobs. I'm quite optimistic. I think new jobs will appear out of it. You know, train drivers didn't exist in 1800, and there's now bloody hundreds of them on strike. You know, but that job appeared rapidly because the technology enabled and needed that role. And I think things will start to emerge. But to be honest, what or how, I don't know. A lot of jobs this time will go, but I think there will be a big replacement of jobs. I was doing, what was I doing the other day? Something with spreadsheets and stuff, and you just think, well, just stick it in an AI and let it do it. And that wiped out 3 people's jobs. You know, it's something to do with data for the company. And so certain levels of jobs, I think, are more vulnerable. I think, strangely, the philosophical, creative people are a little bit more protected, but they could go as well. Physicists are probably okay. Hardcore chemists are probably okay. You'll just have to learn to use the tech. Things where there's real depth of knowledge and you need to verify things properly and stuff will be okay, but we don't know. You know, and then there's ethics. What are the ethics of this? What are the ethics of you finding your own work on there used by ChatGPT? You know, what are the ethics? They're using it for, you know, there's basically a low-level cyber war going off at the minute, and you know it's being used in that to attack, and it learns. This is the key problem with it. It learns. It's not just sending a sophisticated machine; it's sending something that's capable of learning. So there's all sorts of problems coming out of it with that. I don't know the answers to any of this, but if you crack any of those, you'll get a Nobel Prize. But they're really big issues. They're big issues for a rail company, they're big issues for Microsoft, they're big issues for Google. And they're big issues for small agencies that use AI. Ironically, you know, we tend to think of AI and we talk about machine learning's Terminator on the left here. But in reality, most users of it so far are very mundane. In this case, tuna sandwiches. And the mundanity of that, from our own experience, is we're using, I set up the technical infrastructure of machine learning labs, and the machine learning labs team are now doing things, but they're doing projects, and what they are doing here is using machine learning to predict, or to better predict, when trains will need food. We run journeys that are 8 hours long, so you can go halfway up and run out of food in the buffet. And you've got historic data, but there's other data affects it. So, for instance, if it's very cold, people will eat more. You know, if they've got the opportunity, because you shiver and you want energy and things. And we're using it for very mundane things. So we are using it to forecast how many tuna sandwiches we need. Now that's advanced tech, but actually we worked out that that could save us several £100,000 a year. Because it's about waste management, actually. So we're both running out of food, but other times we overstock and we throw it away. And so that is a way, you know, for instance, machine learning can make you more efficient. Now you can apply the same sort of approach to other things in the business. You might want to apply it to, in our case, the take-up of uniforms, how often they're replenished and things like that. You might want to look at how often trains are breaking down and why. And to give you some prediction of when that will happen or what the pattern actually is. And also we can use it for passenger behaviour and passenger numbers. We can predict that on Wednesday that train's going to be full at 11:30. This is really boring stuff. None of it's like the Terminator. Right? But in the physical real world, we can keep predicting that, but we're still going to need people on the train managing it. And we're still going to need people to look at that and just sense check it occasionally. And this is why I don't think it's as big a threat to jobs as some people are saying, but maybe in other ways, but not in the obvious ways. Because most businesses that adopt AI will start to do things like that, rather than the Terminator, apart from Boston Dynamics. We've seen desperate, hell-bent on building a Terminator. You seen the latest robot of theirs last week, the video?
The flamethrower?
No, the one that can jump up and down like this in a circle. And,
Oh yes.
it got knocked over and it gets up in a very funny way, circular, and it just gets up and carries on. Thankfully, we haven't invented a decent battery. As soon as battery tech catches up, we're stuffed. That probably lasts about 30 seconds. But that is another thing about AI that I'm finding with working with it. It's very mundane things. And in your own life, I suppose what you're talking about using it for are things like, we talked about earlier, protein analysis, and structural analysis of things. I mean, I'm really not a chemist, so, ignore my ignorance here. But you've got the ability to use it to study and to look at whatever it is you're trying to study, and to look at what you're finding. You could use it to, verify. It's like a second opinion. Or it could uncover things you didn't know. So with the sandwiches, we uncover things we didn't know. We didn't know we were wasting, nearly £1 million a year on food. Which is quite wow. You also learn that you might just stock tuna sandwiches, not salmon sandwiches. And every industry is having its moments like that at the minute. The other thing we're doing with AI is robotic process automation. So when I talked about boring spreadsheet stuff, we're just starting to work out how to get rid of those really boring jobs where people just sit all day filling numbers in. And we're doing analysis of people's keyboard usage. It's all with agreement, it's not secret. Spyware. And we're working out, what are the repetitive jobs and can we automate them? So somebody can just say, I need to run this job today, and it just does it. And that's increasingly going to be a feature of the office of the future because of this. But the real strength of it in that is it can learn. So once you work with these technologies, you find that they do learn. And when you talk to people who are doing the really advanced stuff, they often will tell you they're freaked out because sometimes it comes up with stuff and they have no idea where it comes from. When you work with machine learning, it's probabilistic, right? It looks at stuff, it looks at patterns, it looks at all sorts of factors, and it says it's 95% probable this is what you're looking for. AI is starting to go one step further, and we don't know how. And there is my last slide has got a link to an article I saw on Scientific American yesterday about the use of quantum computers with AI. And I want to show you that, but the slide's not there because it was on the cloud version and we can't get onto the cloud, so I'm missing that last slide. But that is about, that's the point at which I think all bets are off. Because they've now found that quantum computers are doing things in what appears to be the same way as a human brain does when they apply AI techniques to them. It's very basic, very new at the minute, but it's working like this instead of like a computer, because you know that the brain and the computer don't work in the same way. Yeah, they're different things. If you want to ask a question, do, or challenge me. Quite happy to have an argument. I've come all this way, I feel lost without one. I do want to talk about culture, okay? Because obviously that's the thing I'm really into. I could talk about rail and AI and Microsoft and games if you want, but I'm even more into culture than I am into games. Just out of interest, when I worked on Xbox One, the starts of AI within Microsoft, it was already running properly then. So this is quite a while ago now. You play a game on Xbox One and it's constantly working out what you're going to do next and downloads the stuff behind to let that level of the game continue seamlessly. And this is where, money from AI really starts to come. So you run around a corner, you're in this situation, you've got your gun, and in the background, on the cloud, It's saying, right, it's more than likely this is going to happen next. And it gives you the setup, the graphics for that next set of actions. It's not just a pre-programmed thing that follows set routines if you go this way. It's making decisions constantly, and it's only getting better and better, this. And I think and one of the things I worked on was computer vision for the connectors we had at the time as well, and that was about looking at people and working out whether they were overly stressed.
That downloading things beforehand, was that probabilistic over everybody or for the actual player?
No, it's for you.
It's for the player.
Yeah.
So if you're completely useless, then it knows that
it knows to slow down. And the great thing is, if you use a Microsoft or Sony racing game with cars, and you play against 5 other drivers, those drivers are avatars of real players who it thinks are almost the same as good as you, but not quite. So that you've got a slightly better chance of winning, right? And that means you get the gamification, so you feel like you're achieving. But they are profiles based on real people's behaviours that are analysed. They're not just programmed 5 other cars, right? But that is specific to you. So they've been using it for a long time and things like that, and that was only made possible with the advent of broadband. Because you couldn't get that down a dial-up line quick enough, in enough quantities. That's why games used to be on discs. But now everybody's getting fibre, it becomes much easier. And in fact, what I gather, the Xbox itself is going to disappear. And it will all be an online service that can play on any machine. And because you've got fibre in the background, you can do all this and the cloud in the background, you can do all this computation. The AI, the machine learning, in real time. And effectively, you've got a friend helping you through the game. Now, who'd have thought that for playing games, eh? It's a bit different from Ludo. Well, or is it? With Ludo, you've got this computer working. And that's kind of what we're doing. And one of the things I've said at other talks I've given where I've been a bit even wider is that, a few thousand years ago we saw the shift from hunter-gatherer to farming, and farming begat cities. And then we saw the Industrial Revolution, the big one, and that helped us with our horsepower, our strength. We built machines that made it easier to dig things and whatever, but they were all mechanical if you think about it. They were all replacing human activity. But now I think we're undergoing a jump from horsepower to brain power. And honestly, I mean, it's a world I'd love to see, but I'm too old. But I think it'll be fabulous. Thankfully, I'll be dead long before I have to find out I'm wrong. But the fact is, this technology is going to be sitting in everything. So it's sitting in your desk at work, helping you complete tasks. It's firing bits of games down to you. It's driving trains, it's driving buses and cars. I mean, look at the cars there. Another one I've shown at other places is an engineering drawing of a car. So look, that's a Triumph Healey. I'm not that old, but I remember them. And here's a Tesla. And you've got the typical sort of line exploded drawing thing. And with the Tesla, the design of the Tesla is a flow chart because it's software. And this is another key thing to understand. Software is going to be in everything. And once you start putting all these blocks in place, you end up with incredibly powerful technologies under this bracket of AI that will learn what people do and can respond to them. And we don't know. Nobody knows how that will turn out. I do know, having driven a Tesla and looked at the build quality, that I don't want to buy a car built by a software engineer. I think the people at Land Rover do it better. But there's a truth to that, because it is a software-first piece of kit. Because the software operates the machine. And that's why you can basically ask a Tesla to drive you, and that's what the big breakthrough was, It's able to actually drive for you. It's not just an addition of software, it is software with wheels. When I was a kid, we always thought of the Terminator and we thought of things like that as robots. But that's your robot for ordinary people. But what was the first robot you bought in this room? It was a vacuum cleaner. And again, that goes back to that notion of mundaneness. You have a vacuum cleaner that learns your floor and then hoovers up, and it knows not to bother you when you're in and things like this. There's all sorts of sort of stuff it learns. Similarly with the Tesla, it's a robot. When I was a kid, if I'd watched a film and you'd had a robot driver, it would have been a humanoid robot driving a car. But you don't need the humanoid. The car itself is the robot. So it's everywhere, and I think that's affecting people like me when I'm working with art and culture. And one of the key things that I see coming out of things is this concept of averageness. We've got computation everywhere, we've got the web, we've got all the internet, we've got all this data, this information, and things are becoming average because it's constantly optimizing. So this is a study that was done of Airbnb, and it's finding that no matter where in the world you booked it, the rooms were starting to look the same because they responded to the data of what was selling. And so they began to optimise it. They see it was white was always a big seller, so everything painted white, modern. And you can find the links on these slides so you can have a look at the study. It's
IKEA is everywhere.
But it is. IKEA's part of that. It's absolutely part of that whole averageness of interior design. But Airbnb has really accelerated it. I don't know about you, but you know, if I went to Bangkok when I was 12, it was about it being different. But actually there's another study that shows you all these modern city skylines, and they all look the same. There's no local culture in them. And we're averaging out, and that's because of this swamp of data, and there's a danger that the technologies we're talking about here will continue and build on that, because if you're feeding all that data in, it's going to come to the same conclusion. And that's a big thing for designers, for artists, because the stuff people want is all the same old crap, basically. That's another famous one of cars. They are all different cars. This is called the wind tunnel effect. Because they've optimised the design processes of cars, they've come to an optimal design for cars, which is pretty much the same. You know, no matter which make. If you choose any class, they're all about the same. And when you're going back home tonight, start looking at the cars, you'll see what I mean. You know, they're starting to break out of it a bit, but this has been going on for a couple of decades. And this again is all about data and optimization. We know what sells, we know who's buying, we know what they want, we know what the wind tunnel says to do to make it aerodynamic and energy efficient, and we all use the same software to design it. Ping. Unfortunately, I can live with that, you know, they're just cars. Unfortunately, it's happening with AI art. This guy did this thing, and again, it's on this wonderful article called The Age of Average. And he asked about 11,000, sorry, the text has gone up, about 11,000 people, various questions and this, that, and the other, and they went away and generated art, and they all came back looking like this. And you think, good grief, where's the Picasso going to come from that breaks the mould? Because the people who are producing it can't break out of those constraints. And I was reading this week about some prompt monkeys. You know, you enter prompts into ChatGPT, and they're calling them prompt monkeys now. People are hired by agencies to make the stuff through prompts. And I was reading about art directors having to correct the prompt monkeys because they don't understand what an image is on any fundamental level. They think it's just, well, I'm just describing it pops out. They don't understand what a creative image is, what a piece of art is. One of the biggest problems I have with techies is they produce machines that produce images and they call it art. And it's not. All this art is derivative. It's derived from that huge worldwide wodge of data. And it's optimizing. Because the AI is smart, it knows that this is likely what you want, because all these other people want it. Therefore it gives it you. And so you go around your friend's house and he says, I've got this great new piece of art, look, and you go, oh Christ, it's the same as mine. And it's a real problem for artists and creatives. We've got to tackle that as much as you've got to tackle it in chemistry, what you do with it. You know, there is something ineffably human about art. There's nothing human about that. No challenge yet? You're welcome to have a go at me, go on. And I think that prompt thing is a really interesting story this week. How can you tell something to make an image if you don't understand what an image is? Because when I make art, I can tell you in the nth degree why I've done what I've done on every bit of that canvas. I can tell you about the colour, the form, the texture, the light. I can tell you why I chose that medium, what the particular characteristics of that medium were that made me choose it. You know, and all you see is the mocking videos of somebody throwing paint at canvas. You know, and just the media, isn't it? But actually most decent artists are actually really thinking about their work. But this kind of devalues it. And I was just saying at dinner tonight that if I was running IKEA, all those framed photographs would already be AI, because there's no copyright problems, no ownership contestation, no money, no royalties. And frankly, we know what people buy, so let's give them more of it. But that's that averageness coming out again.
But would AI not bring out a picture of the IKEA, because you know that's what people want? So if you asked AI to do it, would it not produce?
Yeah, but if you only ever give people what they want, you never get anything new.
Well, what would AI do? Because
well, it wouldn't, that's my point.
Right.
It would give you the average. It would give you loads of average solutions, not anything novel.
Okay.
We're a long way away from the first AI Picasso, who changes things completely.
So it's not going to be novel, okay, yeah.
And I think novelty is an interesting thing. I was reading a book, forgotten his name, he's written about creativity and neuroscience. And the first chapter is in moaning. He writes beautifully humanly as well. It's not a dry book, it's thick and dense there. But he writes in the first chapter about this, and he says the publishers wouldn't let me use the word novelty in the title because it sounds cheap. But actually that's what he's talking about. Where does novelty come from? And that's something I, as an artist working with anything like AI or machine learning, have got to understand. What is novel about what I'm doing? What is it exploring? Or is it just getting a massive statistics engine with tons of analysis and producing me what it thinks I will like based on what everybody else has said, like the cars and like the Airbnb? And this is where it gets really exciting, you know, because I don't know what's going to happen next with all this. I do know 30 years ago on that MA that a friend of mine built, I suppose, an AI that called Rose, that was a child, and he taught it to draw over the space of a year. And it was producing its own drawings, but you've got to question back, did he teach it to produce drawings he might have expected it to do? Or did it produce something new? And I don't think, thinking back, it did. And I don't see where the novelty is coming from. Because our brains are remarkable, and we do produce novel things. Now, the way we do it might be analogous to something else, but we do produce novelty.
So when will AI take advantage of serendipity?
Well, it already does to a point. I mean, when it works with probability, there are other bits about it that will give you things serendipitous, but you've got to spot that as well. And I think what you've got to do when it does something like that, and they do occasionally, you've got to pick that and say, like, let's start again from that point. Because that's the new jumping off point, whereas people just keep piling the data on and it gets swamped again.
Is this a matter of complexity? He's thinking that lots of the examples are criterion-led.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at the cars, they're looking for economy, fuel economy, for example, as opposed to aesthetics.
Yeah.
Now, within the IKEA mould, I think that they're actually thinking to the future as well. They're not just selling as much as they can today. They're building new ways of getting people in, which are probably not completely profit-led.
Well, experience is a big part of it. If you can give people a real experience, they'll engage more, and that leads to profit.
How close is AI to changing its criteria?
I don't think it is yet. If I'm honest, there may be examples of it, but I haven't seen any. I mean, that's when it's thinking for itself, isn't it? And it's starting to say, right, I've done all this, but actually, what about this?
What they really want.
Which is what we do. We get people all the time who do things you don't expect. But if you take a worldwide sample of people, you find that maybe 1,500 other people have done that because we are the same type of machine. So I think we're a way away, but I think it's coming. I mean, I always said with robots, people worry about robots. I will start to worry when you can take a robot, to your grandma's house, stick it in the flat and just say, make her a cup of tea, will you? And it doesn't know the flat. Because at the moment with things like robots, they have to be trained to know where they are and what everything is. And it's the same with AI, they work off the stuff you give them. But there is going to come a point, a singularity as they called it, isn't they, where it starts to think for itself effectively. Now, whether it is thinking for itself or not is a massive debate. But I want to be there as an artist pushing that. And this is where I think, when I said at the start that the art background actually helps me philosophically, because I can take that on. I've learned complexity, it was part of that MA, and I've carried on since with it, non-linearity in systems. And I talk to our people at work sometimes about non-linearity. I go, look, you push that up, what's going to happen over here, Blank. We haven't got enough education in that sort of stuff. But increasingly the world is becoming complex. And our interactions and place in the world is becoming a marker of complexity. I'm totally with you on this. Which is brilliant, but frightening.
So at the moment, is learning the wrong word, and is adaptation maybe better?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see when it evolves rather than adapts. That's probably quite a good analogy. Because people mix those two words, don't they?
Is there a way of asking it to produce something unusual? I don't know whether you can program the word unusual, but is that actually something?
I've never done it, I don't know. You could do it. I suspect what it would do is produce something that has been unsuccessful with elsewhere. And it wouldn't actually be unusual, because if you asked everyone to do it, they'd probably do something similar. If you think about it, the more you think about all of this stuff, the more difficult it gets to deal with on a human level. Because of what is unusual. We've got 7 billion people in the world. If 1,000 people do something, is that unusual? Well, if 1,000 people are doing it, it's not. But that's a very small sample. I don't know. I wish I was the greatest philosophical genius of our age, but I'm not. So, and the other question then I ask and go on is, are those images actually art? It's an interesting point. If it's producing it, is it art? What's art?
Well, you said earlier on that the AI is necessarily derivative.
At the moment.
So that means let's take the science aspect. We know as scientists that in the last 2 decades, the amount of scientific literature has grown enormously, and a large part of it is extremely unreliable. How does AI distinguish between the wheat and the chaff?
It doesn't, and that's the problem with it.
So then there is a big problem in terms of scientific prognosis and prediction.
If you want to talk about that, that's a massive problem. This is what I was saying about it becoming inbred. It's reading its own data and getting things further and further wrong. It's learning the wrong things. And the more the internet and data sets are filled with incorrect assumptions and fallacies. I mean, I don't know if you know, but there's been a couple of cases where AI has been asked to write something and put the links and the sources, and it's made them up. Right? Because it knew it needed links, so it's just made something up that sounds right.
Well, we used to get applications
That's like
for
students,
advanced
isn't
courses from Eastern European students that made up their reference lists as well.
But the point is, it's working out that the only way it can answer your question is to lie to you. Now, you can find all this on the web. You can Google all this. It's true, honest. Google never lies.
Can we borrow an idea from genetic optimization? You know what I mean by that?
I understand very vaguely.
Well, I mean, if you use a simulation engine, it will get you to the top of a hill.
Yeah.
But it might be just a foothill. So you
That's
have
right.
to bring in an outlying piece of data to drag you away from that foothill so that you get to the top of Everest. That is called genetic optimization. It's used in simulation to get the best technical solutions. Now, in thinking about avoiding breathing in your own exhaust, which is what is happening now, can that idea be introduced, of artificially introducing an outlying piece of information?
Yes, you can. And I think one of the problems is, though, that a lot of the AI we see is being used by people who don't understand things like that. I think also the new interface to AI, because remember, AI has been around for decades, but ChatGPT was a good example of one of the first interfaces for it that anybody could use. And the interface is not a good one. So, it's difficult to sort of factor that stuff in unless you get rid of it and go behind. I think it's up to researchers to do that. I genuinely do. I think we've got to try all of that stuff out. I don't see why not. I can't give you a technical scientific answer here. But, it's got to learn like that. But at the moment, the AI that we are exposed to publicly is just scraping the internet and data sets. And it's not clever. It isn't discriminatory. It can't work out that this is valuable, this isn't. It just says, this seems to be valuable, and this seems not to be. Whereas we still can make a choice. If we're highly educated in a particular field, we can say, no, wrong, right, wrong, right. But I don't think we're that many decades away from it doing that. And then I don't know what we've created.
So do you think when you are referring to the quantum computers doing the same kind of processes as our brain, but the quantum...
Well, no, it's doing things that appear to be able to do what our brain does, but not necessarily in the same way.
Okay, so the quantum computer has 100% self-confidence when we don't. So we always have this hesitance.
Well, no, it will never have confidence. It just works out that this is the answer that I need to give. But they don't necessarily have 100% confidence in that. It just doesn't work like that. I mean, what's interesting, when I first worked with AI back at Aviva, working with health insurance, we got to 95% accuracy. And humans were 93% accurate. So of course insurers go, well, this is going to make us more money. But they can't take account then of insurance for things that suddenly emerge, like COVID, or new pathogens that come out, whatever, I don't know. And I think that's where the humanity's sort of still needed. But I don't know for how much longer. I mean, you shouldn't go away depressed. I think there'll be wonderful things for kids and grandkids to do. And we'll get out of it. We'll be all having pensions by then.
Sorry, before you go further, Bob brought up a question about the, you mentioned averageness and contradiction to creativity. And one of the things I have been worried about is that over the past 30 years or whatever, 40 years, I would claim that at least in chemistry, although the number of publications and papers have exploded tremendously. I mean, when I was a grad student, I had time to read every single paper in the major journals. Now it's theoretically impossible for anybody, a human being, to read even 2 or 3 journals per field. And at the same time, the number of papers that are being published I would claim that the level of creativity has gone down. It's become
well,
average.
it's an industry, to be honest.
Yeah, it is.
You know, and they're doing the averageness. They're just doing what they need to do to get the publication, to get the research money, rather than trying to find something new and do a real insight or breakthrough.
Yeah, and we have in the universities, I don't think there's a single university anymore where they don't have professional grant writers. We used to write our own grant applications.
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah, not anymore.
No, I wonder if that's adaptation though. It's just a system that's adapting.
Yeah.
So if you've got that complexity, you know, it's going to find its own new balance, isn't it, as new things come into market. And the university industry and the research industry is much bigger now than it ever was. You know, every country's now got good universities.
But is it creating more complexity, or are we getting out of complexity?
Well, no, I think if you've got a complex system, if you, you know, non-linearity in particular, if you push new things in, it tries to achieve a new equilibrium. And the new equilibrium might be the averaging out. You know, this is, you know, what I explain to people with weather, isn't it? With climate change, it's not about CO2 per se, it's about CO2 being pumped in at a rate that upsets the equilibrium, which means it has to find a new equilibrium, which could be extreme or not, depending on how it manages to balance. And I think the point about the complexity and non-linearity is valid. I tend to look at things through that lens, and even with the, you know, with the art stuff, it's a complexity, and I don't think that stuff we've looked at is art, for a lot of reasons, including that. I think it's just averaged out. It's images, not art. Art's a human thing. It doesn't exist without an artist. Hi.
On the issue of creativity, are you familiar with the skunkworks concept?
Lockheed.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, that was an approach where if you do traditional product development, you've got tunnel vision, and people say, well, we'll do it as we did it before.
Step by step.
Step by step. But if you take a group of people and put them somewhere else and say, you're free to think, and by the way, bring in people with different disciplines, bring in some biochemists or something, and just go away and don't even come back unless you've got something to say. And that was a way of creating something that was different, not repeating the same.
It worked incredibly well.
It did. Now, do you think that's a way to avoid this?
Yes, I do. I think
that can be actively done.
Yeah, but I think not enough businesses are brave enough to do that. Funnily enough, I think the team I'm in is a junior version of that, in that we've been told to reinvent what we do, and we're from different backgrounds and we're trying our best from all different angles. So I'm not in a team of techies. You know, I'm dealing with business people, marketing people, etc. And it's the same thing. You bring in engineers and you bring in, you know, scientists or whatever you choose to bring in. And I really believe that's one of the best ways forward in this emerging world, for us to form teams like that in different ways, to work with the AI alongside us. And that way the AI can learn, because it will soak up what you're doing. But at the moment we're just pumping stuff in and standing back. I really do. I think that's the other side of the coin from what I would call a fine art approach to an engineering approach. I think that is an exact, for me, model of how the two things are the same. Artists, good artists, think like that as well. They'll deal with different sources. They'll deal with other people they've never normally talked to. They'll look at things. They'll read something and it will take them on a journey that starts here and ends here.
Istvan Hargitsa wrote a book about beehives of creativity about 30-40 years ago, I think. And I think he had a point there. Way back in the 1980s, when I was doing my postdoc at Berkeley, there was a distinct feature of future or later Nobel Prize winners, how they hired people to their teams. If they had a chemistry team and they were tackling a chemistry problem, the team leader would say, well, I'm a chemist, I know my chemistry, I'm going to hire a chemical engineer, I'm going to hire a molecular biologist, I'm going to hire an artist in the team. Now, that's something that doesn't happen anymore that much.
No.
People are hiring chemists to solve chemistry problems.
Well, they've averaged things out again, because I've just had a job ad going out for a head of something. I've had 330 applicants. And I think at least 280 of them could be identikit CVs, and they're quite good CVs.
Yeah.
But they've all done the same data things. If you look
And
at them,
who goes
nothing
through-
stands out,
Yeah. And
because
who
they've
goes
earned a
through
good
the
career and they've made money and whatever. But I'm looking for somebody who can think differently in that and build a culture. You know, so I'm looking at them, and none of them are standing out. They're all good, but not standing out. And I think this is the problem. Once everything becomes an industry and there are a lot of people doing it, things do average out. I think those experimental times at Berkeley, you know, wonderful stuff.
My last job was at Aalto University,
Okay,
and
that in Finland.
in Finland,
Yeah, I
that's
know
the quantum computing
Yeah.
stuff. And we had one of the last positions I had open was a postdoc position. There were more than 100 applicants. I saw the final 10 because the more than 100 applicants had been scrutinized by the HR people who had no idea of chemistry, but they had Excel tables.
Sorry.
Are we, because there are so many more chemical discoveries or whatever being produced, I think according to Google, last 2 centuries chemical compounds have continued to be exponentially increased in the number discovered. I know that's a very,
Doesn't surprise me.
that's a very minor sort of like metric. I just wonder whether there is still as much creativity, but it's a smaller peak of a larger
I have no idea. I'm not a chemist.
mountain. But I mean, across the board, when you're talking about CVs and so on, are you receiving fewer outstanding CVs numerically, or is it just that you're receiving more CVs?
I'm receiving more CVs, and it's harder for me to pick through them.
And so those, I wonder whether you probably...
People were less mobile in jobs,
Yeah,
for a start, so you see much more activity. And this is another thing about the AI, because if you start to run that through an AI, it's going to pick up on the amount of transactions and things like that as a key feature. And for instance, I was starting to look at it myself, and I was seeing quite a lot of jobs where people had taken jobs in 2022 and were now moving. I was thinking, why does 2022 keep coming up? Because it was just after COVID. So whatever they were doing, they were coming out of COVID and thinking, fuck it, I want a new job. And the job market was good, so the money was better, so they were starting to move. And now they've gone into those jobs and they've hit the same problems they had before and got bored, and they're now looking to move again. So I don't know, it's changing patterns. This is why this technology is really important, because actually it can analyse that stuff and make suggestions for you, but I just see patterns. I don't know if they're real patterns or just preferences I'm picking up.
The chemical diversity problem was taken up by Stu Schreiber in the early 1990s with the emergence of combinatorial chemistry, and they started to point out that we are creating more and more compounds, which is true, but the chemical space that we cover is getting smaller and smaller. So we're not covering the whole available chemical space diversity.
Yeah,
And that was
it's happening everywhere, to be honest. This is the averaging thing. You can see it with cars, you can see it with A, B and B.
Yeah.
You won't see it with chemistry unless you're in it. But it's happening literally everywhere, and this is one of the problems with computation everywhere. So once you then go that next step and you start making the computation work and make decisions and this, that and the other, it's based on that averaging. At some point, this has got to start producing novelty. I suppose, from my point of view, and I'll finish soon, but who is the artist in my world? If I ask the machine to make an image or piece of art, is the machine the artist? Because it's produced the artifact. If you go to IKEA and you buy a picture and it turns out they've all been produced by AI, but yet it appears to be signed, what are you buying? Has it got any worth? Has it got any intrinsic emotional worth? Is it just something like nice background music? Is it the visual equivalent of lift music? It's just there to break up the white walls in the house and the estate you bought.
It's like wallpaper music.
Exactly that. But I think there's some very real things, and I think this applies across the disciplines. Because once you start using this tech, you have to start asking what you actually are. You know, you're no longer doing a lot of the things you would have done. Maybe you are at the moment, but you know, in time. So what are you? What's that job? What's that new role? And I think it's very difficult. It's very difficult for artists. I mean, there's a guy who earns $2 million a year from Spotify, and he just sits and he endlessly produces the equivalent of lift music. And he just streams it on Spotify, and people go, play me some music to keep me happy. Right? Or play me jogging music. They're not even choosing an artist. They're choosing a feeling. And they're going with that feeling, and it's quite interesting that it's moving us back to that emotion. We're away from the brand. I can't remember his name, and I couldn't tell you who he is, but he's out there. He's earning a bloody fortune, doing Twinkle, Twinkle, Dinkle, Dinkle, Dinkle. And it's music, but it's not innovative, it's not exciting. It is literally oral wallpaper.
Yes. I have about the same feeling about David technology.
The iPad stuff he's been doing.
The iPad.
Yeah, it doesn't seem...
It's getting very formulaic.
But to be fair to him, he's 90.
He's nearly blind.
And he did do fantastic work for most of his career.
Yeah.
So let him. I mean, have you ever looked at the late Picassos? They're disgusting.
You often find this combination of artist and technology just before a step that makes you look back and reflect on it and think, well, was it art at that time? And I'm thinking particularly about early 19th century when people were experimenting with this little device that allowed you to see an image and have a look at the paper below you and draw a sketch, which was actually just drawing what they saw with a piece of physics. And okay, they could colour it in, but it's almost like colouring by numbers. And some of the images that were painted like that are in our art galleries. They're regarded as magnificent pieces of work. But you could have taken a picture on a photograph with a camera 20 years later, and it would have looked exactly the same.
It's a constant evolution. I'll give you an even better example as your chemists. So the invention of oil painting. You do realise oil paint was invented. It hasn't always been there, right? 1300s, I think, Brunelleschi people were playing with it. That changed the face of Western art and culture. Prior to that, people used to paint friezes and they used to paint frescoes. So they'd paint flat colour into wet plaster. So if you go in an old ancient church, you see figures up the wall and they're clearly meant to be behind each other, but because they didn't have perspective, they just said, well, we know that person's in the space, so they just arranged it behind because it looks as sort of as it's behind. But when oil painting came, this development, what it allowed you to do as a painter was to use the oil to give you semi-transparency in the pigment and to apply it in layers. And so it allowed you to build layers describing the light falling on an object, which is where you get the 3D-ness started to appear, and the almost photographic, light on a vase or whatever. And that was a good example of chemical technology that changed art. And I think I agree with you, artists are much more often involved than people give us credit for. I think the 20th century separated them. But I know more and more people like myself who work with both now. And I think that's going to be an increasing thing. That technical stuff, and then the rediscovery of perspective, allowed things like those magnificently deep canalettos to be done. But that's all science and tech. But it was interpreted by somebody with feeling. I'm impressed by the clouds, I'm impressed by the scale of these buildings, I want to make them look awesome to capture that moment. We had the same thing happen with photography. Photography appeared and it changed portrait painting. What's the point painting a photographic picture if you can take one? And we also had, in that century, what a century, oil painting, but with cheap chemical pigments and paints. So Monet, people like that, the Impressionists, were the first to use these newly cheap pigments and paints in tubes, and it gave them many more colours. And they were able to capture the vibrancy of sunsets, and they began to look at the learning on light and what light was, because that was being discovered. And that's when they started to break it down into the Impressionism that we know, the dots of light. And throughout we've done that. Now I'll show you, I'm coming up to the last two here. And this is Harold Cohen. He was working with computers and art and AI in the 60s. And you can see him working there. He didn't die that long ago. But you can see there he's using machines to generate what he considers art, but he's making the decisions on what is art and what isn't. But he's using the machines to do stuff, and he explored also. You can look him up, he's fantastically creative. I mean, what a pioneer that is. Working with those old punch card machines and things at the time. But he was starting to use AI techniques, right? And what we've got now, so jump 60 years on, and we're starting to see things like this everywhere that are AI generated. So these are chaotic patterns. So when you see things like this, they're moving. But they are still using things that the Impressionists used. They're using dots and light and colour. And they're capturing brightness, and they're capturing vividness. They're capturing movement and feeling. And it's constantly changing. You're not going to get the same experience twice. Now AI, when you start using it properly, you start to apply it to things like that. Sure, it can handle the complexity, but it can also start to learn from the viewers. So the next generation of my work back at the start, I showed you the portraits, are simply that. I'm just writing a book at the minute on it, but when I've done that, I've got to put cameras on the frames, on mirrors, write some code and use AI to start making you into one of those anti-selfies and to evolve over time from people looking at them. And it's introducing whole new aesthetics. Artwork that never stays the same. Wow. It's, but similarly with your own fields, there are new things being done or capable of being done with these tools. If a thicky artist can do this, with no technical training, what can you do? You're phenomenally clever people. But you need to explore, inquire, think and link. Everything you do has an effect somewhere, and you need to be aware of what the effects are, and then you start to work with AIs and machine learning rather than letting them do it for you. The last slide was that slide about that story about the quantum computers. That's the link. You can have the slide and look it up. I had it nicely pictured and everything, but lost the slide. But that to me, that story is where all bets are off. If you've got quantum computers that can do things that appear to be what the brain can do, then I don't know. Novelty will come, I guess.
So I have a question. So AI at the moment is just a huge computer. They can have a lot of database.
Yeah.
They can use a lot of database to create things. But do you think one day they can be creative like human?
Well, I think this is the point. I don't know. I suspect they will be creative, but the question is, what will define that creativity? So I started a doctorate on this, believe it or not, 25 years ago and never finished it because there was nothing to read.
There is now.
There is now, yeah. So I'm thinking of picking it up, but what would the aesthetic of an AI system be? Would it choose to make art at all? Or would its definition of creative output be completely different? Or something we don't understand?
Well, the human brain is, you got trillions of neurons.
Yeah, but it's not a computer, is it?
Yeah, it's not a computer.
No, the art we make is a product of us, yeah?
Yes.
I use art in a way, as an artist, and most artists do, to test what I'm seeing and hearing outside. It's like a reflection back that you process. What I'm saying is if you get a truly smart AI and it starts to produce something novel, what will the nature of its own aesthetic be? Why would we assume it would like what we like?
Well, that would be scary. One day
Yeah.
they will. So what are we?
But that's what that doctorate started off as. What would its aesthetic be like?
Yeah.
And there was literally nothing 25 years ago, but I could have another crack at it, I suppose. I never finished it. So. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the impact of
Optimistic. I think we're entering a golden age after a rocky patch.
So
I think it will
the
make
danger that it will manipulate democracy and fake information.
Well, it's going to be no worse than our current politicians at that. We do that ourselves. It's only learned from us. I mean, this is the other thing. If it starts doing it, it's come from us. I actually genuinely think, not for us maybe, but for our grandchildren, it's going to be potentially start to be a golden age. I mean, that shift from horsepower to brain power, I think, is fundamental. But we can't conceive of what it will actually mean. Right, that was the end. But yeah, questions?
Yeah, it seems to me that the big strength of AI is that using advanced statistical techniques, basically, and I think it's similar to neural networks in the brain.
Neural networks are part of the development of it.
And so that applies itself quite relatively easily to pattern matching problems in medicine, for instance, for pathology.
Yeah.
It can be very good at detecting cancerous aspects of an X-ray, which a doctor may not necessarily.
It can also get it wrong.
But where there's a mismatch is that humans don't have the sophistication to do pattern matching based on huge amounts of data and so on. But they want an explanation, and because the AI system is working on statistics and pattern matching and so on, if it's process control, that's perhaps easier.
I mean, this is where the change in our jobs is coming. We are going to have to learn to trust machines.
But because AI systems occasionally hallucinate, as they say.
They do. And indeed humans interfere with them.
And so the human computer interface somehow needs to deal with this risk of hallucination, or even just, if a person's acquired expertise over 30 or 40 years, he'll want some sort of explanation.
No, but we are, technologically speaking, at that point where the Wright brothers were when they took off.
Yeah.
Now, bear in mind, 60 years later, we landed on the moon.
Yeah.
That was a hell of a leap, but by God, it was rocky at the start. And it was only the First World War that pushed the development of planes and things, because they started using them. And I think with this, once we start seeing uses like that and it starts working, you put more money into it, won't you? Because there's actually money to be made from it, and actually health benefit gains.
And presumably there are some domains which lend themselves better to AI techniques.
Absolutely.
Because humans
it's not on everything. I mean, none of this is on everything, but it's going to creep in somewhere. I mean, if it's just taking away a typist's job, it's still creeping in. Sorry, I have finished the slides, but I'm happy to stay and talk or answer questions or try and answer questions. I've tried avoiding them so far.
Right, let's see if we have some questions.
Well, we've questioned throughout. Is that longish?
I'm quite happy to let a few more questions come through before we settle for more informal discussion.
Well, while you do that, I'll get a bottle of water. I'm listening. So I get thirsty when I'm talking.
Right, we'll contemplate, reflect, and become ready to ask more questions.
I've got a kind of story that leads to a question, I suppose. So our daughter is doing genetics research for bioplant science, and so she's doing a lot of experiments, and she's using the data from other people's experiments, and a lot of analysis is needed to see what the data is actually saying. So it requires a lot of programming. She's always hated programming because you always make mistakes and you have to test things.
Don't worry, those jobs are going.
Well, I just, as you say, she actually got GTP to do her programming for her.
So why not?
I'm not talking about ChatGTP that most people knew. No, there's a second version of it that you pay for, and it is infinitely better than the first version. She uses that actually to write her programs, and that for me was mind-boggling.
That's what I'm using to think about the next version of the art stuff. If you think I'm starting at the beginning with an angled bracket, you've got to be jerking. I used to do that in the 90s, not anymore.
Can you say a few words about this text to video? You heard about this text to video stuff, right?
What, generating the video?
Yeah. So, I mean, I look at a few of them, and they're so real, it's incredible. I mean, how can they do it? I mean, even the reflection...
You're still going to need a story writer.
Yeah, you need a story writer, but the video was generated...
Yeah, no, I agree. The technical craft stuff, not so much.
They tell it themselves.
But they've only been releasing the 5-minute things, haven't they?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, I think it's only 1 or 2.
But they look remarkable, and you could do stuff that is perfectly good Netflix quality on that already. Okay. And they will start. This is the IKEA thing I mentioned.
Yeah.
Why bother paying artists to have that art in IKEA? Why not just generate it? And film companies will, and this is what the film actors strike was partly about last year.
Yeah.
So when they went on strike, they were demanding AI rights in there. And that was, you can't use my image without paying me. Because you think of the Terminator, you could just use Arnie's face, and off you go, and just model him. And make 100 films, and he doesn't get a penny. Doesn't have to turn up for work either. I just think I think it's a massively powerful creative tool. But I think the use of it will change the way we think of creatives. So the first thing I think is, where's the person who wrote the novel? Why aren't they writing the prompts? Right? Now, it brings your whole cost of movies down. But what it does do is it means they can do blockbusters cheaply and leave space for indies, I guess. And it's what we've always wanted, isn't it? More individual creativity rather than big, monolithic. I mean, I watched the last Avengers film, and it might as well have been done on a bloody AI. I mean, it looks so false. I mean, they're using it in cameras, by the way, if you go to the studios. I mean, I spent a lot of time working in media, on things like interactive television and stuff, so I did hang out at studios a lot. And when you go into studios, they've been using it for decades now with cameras and with screens attached to the cameras, and you've got a green screen, and they have the pre-rendered background up here, so the person on camera and the director can see it, how it would look in the film. And that's being generated in real time. Now you then add the AI layer to that, and it becomes an incredibly powerful tool indeed. And all you might want then is the leading man or leading woman in the film, and the rest can be completely made up, because that's your brand for the film. You're still going to need a brand for cut through. The problem with those cars is, when you go out to look at all those cars to buy one, you end up going for that little blue and white badge, don't you? And say, BMW. Because you trust the badge. But actually, BMW 3 Series, they're made to the same tolerance as Ford equivalents are. They won't say that, they'll argue, but they are. They use the same machines. Right? But you're paying extra for that little blue and white badge. And that's one of the features of creativity, brand. And that's why when you look at the art world, you think, why is that person? What the fuck have they done? All this sort of stuff. But most of those artists you're aware of who do controversial art, they're building a brand. And the art is actually the brand building, for me. So Damien Hirst is sharks in formaldehyde. They found out recently the ones that were sold recently were actually made in 2017, not 1997. Well, of course, because they rotted. So he just replaced it. But the artifact isn't the issue, it's the process. And this is conceptual art. And once you understand the process and what he's thinking about, it becomes more valuable. And you understand why he does it. And I think with that situation again, once people get on top of that technology, I think we'll see some really interesting stuff coming out. And it might be from places you didn't expect. It might actually democratise it in a way pop music has democratised music. You can write a full symphony on your iPhone. It still doesn't make you a musician.
It doesn't make a symphony.
Well, it structurally might, but it doesn't make it It doesn't make it a good piece of music. But what is a good piece of music anyway? Isn't that just averaging viewpoints out?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on legislation or global rules covering some of those basic things you had at the beginning?
Yeah,
of
the
that
beginning.
chart?
It's really difficult, that, isn't it? I know there's a lot of talk about that stuff. The EU are doing something, aren't they? Quite quickly, which is remarkable, actually. But they are. What do I think? I think they've got to try, but I'm not sure they'll get it right. Is my
But it's interesting because I think if you look at that from the legislative point of view, as far as I can understand, the EU, curiously, is actually adopting a holistic approach.
Yes, it is.
They are looking at
It's
looking
really
at the whole
intelligent,
problem,
actually.
whereas governments like the UK are doing it sector by sector. And I wonder whether, in fact, in some ways, for once, the EU actually might have got it.
Oh no, I think they've got it a lot better.
Yeah.
I really do. I think you can only tackle this stuff holistically.
Yeah.
Sorry, you had your hand up.
Yeah. Legislation is why all those cars look identical.
Partly. It's safety legislation and all of that sort of
Yes,
stuff. I
safety
agree.
legislation, fuel
It's a big
efficiency.
part of it, but the wind tunnel effect is nonetheless real. But yeah, I mean, it's again complexity, though, isn't it? There's so many things intersecting and knocking other systems within systems and what have you. But it's just interesting that one of the points I didn't mention with that car thing, by the way, that is that for some reason white is now by far the most dominant colour, and that's an aesthetic choice by customers.
The IKEA kitchen effect.
Well, it may well be. I mean, none of this. Look, no, actually, good point. Really, none of this is sort of authoritative in that sense, and none of it is giving you an answer. These are things just to provoke you to think, I think. I can't do anything else because, I'm not the world's leading expert Nobel Prize winner on AI, unfortunately. Not yet. Might do that next. But all you can do is think. All you can do is work within that complexity.
And ask interesting questions.
Yeah. Be curious. It's the root of all intelligence for me, curiosity.
Will it make people smarter, or will people be dumber because everything is in the machine? They don't need to learn anything.
Has Google made people smarter or dumber? I learned to carry all that information in my head as a kid. Yeah? Kids now don't need to, right? But has it made them smarter or dumber? I don't know. I think the kids I see are perfectly clever.
I think there's an interesting comment which I mentioned to you earlier. A colleague of mine in Cardiff said this to me a long time ago. He said, Bob, 20 years ago we didn't know much, but we sure understood. And now we are drowning in a welter of information.
We are.
But does anybody see their way through it? That's a good question.
That's what I'm hoping the AI will do.
Well, that's what we'd like it to do, but I think
It's a serious thing. I hope it does.
But if, as we were saying earlier on, we're flooding the internet with lower and lower quality information,
that's going to
and
be
it's
very difficult.
scraping that, then we're heading downwards, aren't we?
To give you a simple example, I have written a book in 4 volumes over 20, 15 years or so on iron metabolism. When I went from volume 1 to volume 2, to the first edition to the second, the number of references, any keyword I chose, increased by a factor of 2, not more than 2 to 3 times. From the second to the third edition, it went about the same, a little bit more, but not much. When I came to the 4th edition, every keyword I looked up had increased by 20 to 40-fold. And I cannot, under any circumstance, read all of that literature. So I'm dependent on what scientific journals have been doing for a long time now. They produce review journals. The trouble is that there aren't enough competent reviewers around to write competent reviews. So even the review journals are giving you rubbish. So it's a very, very difficult field. I could assure you I have no desire to write a 5th edition of my book on iron metabolism because the 4th edition drove both of us mad.
If he refers to the internet when he's writing it, it will end with alien bases on the moon.
Anyway,
I'm ready on the internet. Is that enough? Oh, sorry, you got one
last question.
Einstein said that when the level of technology surpasses the human brain capacity, the humans start becoming dumber. Do you
How would he
agree with
know?
that?
I mean, conjecture, yeah, but I'm not necessarily thinking. Put the technology in here and let's see if we get smarter.
Well,
is our future as cyborgs and robots? Possibly. A co-evolved
and it's
new
our
life
future
form.
in a virtual world, I hope not either.
We're certainly not going to go to the stars as in these bodies. But we could send robots with our brains in, or minds, or equivalent. I'm going to miss it all. Thank you all for listening patiently.
Thank you all.